Welcome back. I'm Dave,
And I'm Wally.
and you're watching Real Reactions, where we go over some of the most crazy, interesting, and funny reels available on the internet today. Let's get into it.
There's something they're not telling us that is so gnarly that they don't think people can handle it.
There are, different scenarios you could explore. For example, you ask, what could be so terrible that they can't tell us about it? Let's say these aliens, wherever they're from, made us, that we're a genetic experiment, that they created our religions, our religious figures, that we are an agricultural product, that somehow they harvest us, that our time is limited, that once the experiment's over, poof, we go away. I remember when there was a push back to have a designer universe, intelligent design universe in the schools. And I wrote a column about it, just said, hey, be careful what you wish for, because you might find out that the intelligent designer isn't God that you're thinking of. It might be some alien science project or something like that. You can imagine a lot of different things that would be really disturbing to people to come out. I don't know if that's the reason for the secrecy.
There's something they're not telling us.
I mean, we could be an experiment, but at the same time, so what? I think there is evidence in our DNA that it's been messed with that accelerated our perhaps natural evolution.
And I think people feel the same way. Why not just disclose what's going on if they indeed do know?
Yeah.
Another day, another Russian nuclear threat, which is just super. I guess that's what we do now. So Russian state TV couldn't help themselves, I guess. We've seen this graphic quite a few times with other weapon systems. But of course, yesterday we've got this Orshnik, new Russian ICBM or IRBM, nobody's really sure, missile that was launched into Ukraine. And Russia today immediately was like, what we should do is talk about how long it would take that missile armed with a nuclear warhead to strike major population centers across Europe. Because that's what you like to see. Now, in case this was a little too vague, right, it wasn't an overt nuclear threat, let's turn to Fighter Bomber, a Russian military blogger who just said this whole thing out loud. Quote, "It has finally become clear that no one will start a nuclear war with Russia for Ukraine. And therefore, we can state that Russia has a completely free hand in using nuclear weapons against military facilities in Ukraine. While there will be some sanctions, maybe an iron curtain from certain countries, condemnation, threats, statements in the style of 'we are very sorry,' but there will be no military response from NATO. None." And Fighter Bomber goes on to talk about how this first missile launch of this Orshnik did not come with a warhead, but the rational next move is to attach nuclear warhead to see the actual impacts of this weapon. Another day, another Russian nuclear.
Man, that Russian TV video of them, wow.
Yeah, I think they're wrong, though. I mean, NATO doesn't have a military for no reason.
Yeah,
They will respond.
they'll do whatever. And then we're in World War III.
It's always Europe with these world wars. What is going on with that?
That is wild looking.
And that's one of them. That's one of the ICBMs. That is crazy looking, dude. Those things are wild looking in the sky.
Something about the way that looks makes me feel like we're at end of times.
Oh, really? To me, it looks like a sperm cell.
It does look like a sperm a little bit.
So this is a new video that just came out of the war in Ukraine of a Russian fiber optic drone sneaking up on a group of Ukrainian soldiers. And there's a couple things to keep in mind here. I'll play this back so you can see it again. And no, I don't have any footage showing the aftermath of this strike. One, you would not expect the soldiers to be able to hear this drone. A Bradley is incredibly loud, even when it's idling, so they wouldn't have heard this at all. But you would expect some of these soldiers to be pulling security facing forward to identify a threat like this as it approaches. Not entirely clear what happened in this situation. Now, the use of these fiber optic drones has kind of increased in recent weeks and months by both Russian and Ukrainian forces. What they're doing is they're attaching a very thin fiber optic cable to the drone itself that spools out behind as it flies back to the operator. The reason for that is there's been a ton of electronic warfare jammers set up all across the front that are costing both sides thousands of drones each month. This fiber optic cable secures that connection so it can't be jammed. You'll notice in looking at some of the older FPV footage, like this one here, the feed is grainy and you start to see it go out as it gets further and further from the operator. That's not the case with the fiber optic drone. So here we have another video showing just how clear that imagery is. But this is another Russian drone actually striking what ends up being a Ukrainian decoy in the tree line. So you can see, even with the much clearer picture here with these fiber optic drones, some of these decoys that the two sides are setting up, in this case a BMP decoy, is still good enough to fool the drone operator. So this is a new video that just came out of the war in Ukraine of a
Interesting.
Fiber optic drone.
Drone warfare is evolving quickly, dude. Wow.
A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The bad half. Nuclear is obsolete. Take out your entire enemy, virtually risk-free. Just characterize him, release the swarm, and rest easy. Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works. Did you see that?
Dude, those things remind me of the locust from Revelation.
Yeah, it reminded me of that too when I saw it.
Things are getting a little too crazy out there.
Because let's be clear, that desert shouldn't be there. Should all be green like the rest of the world. Anunnaki history tells us that the desert is a direct result of the weapons of terror that the Anunnaki used when they were feuding in the Pyramid Wars. World map. Isn't it strange how there's that, stripe of death? Like the terrain is dead, all of the desert area. Do you see how out of place that is? Like everything else is green. If you go to the pyramids in Egypt, you'll find that there is a lot of glass particles in the sand. That happens when there is a huge explosion. Because let's be clear, that desert shouldn't be there. Should all be green like the rest of the world. That's very odd. And if we go and look at the old Sumerian history, ancient books, the Lost Book of Enki, in Tablet 1, it tells us exactly why that is. Funny how no one can explain the desert, but then you go and look at the first writings ever, and it's written right here in plain sight. The plot situation is that there were these pyramid wars. Marduk, one of the sons of Enki, decided to go against all of the other family members of the Anunnaki royals because he wanted to have the power all for himself and thought that he was the rightful heir. Long story short, they have these wars and they decided at a certain point to use these weapons of destruction, what we could similarly think of as nuclear weapons right now. These tablets were dictated to Enoch. That, in the original story, is called Endushar. Let's get back where we left off yesterday. This is the story of how everything became a desert. In all the lands from west to east, a disruptive hand of terror was placed. The gods in their cities were helpless like men. An evil wind, a storm born in a distant plain, a great calamity brought in its past. Death-dealing wind born in the west, its way to the east has made. Its course set by fate. Storm devouring as the deluge. By wind and not by water a destroyer. By poisoned air, not tidal waves, overwhelming. Fate, not destiny. Was it engineered by the great gods? In their council the great calamity had caused. By Enlil and Ninhursag it was permitted. I alone for a halt was beseeching. This is Enki speaking, the brother of Enlil. Day and night to accept what the heavens decree, I argued, to no avail. Ninurta, Enlil's warrior son, and Nergal, my very own son, poisoned weapons in the great plain they unleashed. That an evil wind shall follow the brilliance we knew not. They now cry in agony. That the death-dealing storm born in the west its course to the east shall make. who could foretell? The gods now bemoan. In their holy cities, the gods stood disbelieving as the evil wind towards Sumer made its way. One after another, the gods fled their cities, their temples abandoned to the wind. In my city, Eridu, as the poison cloud approached, I could do nothing to stop it. Escape to the open steppe. To the people I gave instructions. With Ninki, my spouse, the city I abandoned. So here Enki is telling us that Enlil's son and Enlil were the ones that made the decision to use these weapons of mass destruction, these weapons of terror as they call it. And Enki himself pleaded and pleaded not to no avail. Even Enki's own son had ganged up with Ninurta and Enlil to do this against Marduk, his own brother. The problem was, when they unleashed these weapons, they had no idea that there was going to be this like nuclear cloud. The radiation from where they launched these missiles could go to where they were. As they said, this happened in the west and it made all its way to the east. The Anunnaki themselves could not stop it, were in terror, they didn't know what to do. Half of them had families here on Earth. They had their reigns, their kingdoms, animal lands. Everything was destroyed by this one decision. And they were like, but we didn't know that this was going to happen, that there was going to be aftermath, as if that makes what they did any better. Enki and Ninki, his wife, they fled the city. In the city of Nippur, place of the bond heaven and earth, that means where the spaceport was, bond heaven and earth, Enlil could do nothing to stop it. The evil wind against Nippur was onrushing. In his celestial boat, Enlil and his spouse hurry to take off. So Enlil gets his wife and they go into a spacecraft, into a ship. In Ur, Sumer, city of kingship, Nanar, to his father Enlil, for help cried. So now the other culprit of this calamity is crying to his father, saying, what am I going to do? Help me. The evil wind is coming. In the place of the temple that the heaven in seventh step rises, Nanar, the hand of fate, refused to heed. My father who begot me, great God, who to Ur had granted kingship, turn the evil wind away, Nanar pleaded. Great God who decrees the fates, let Ur and its people be spared, your praises to continue, Nanar appealed. Enlil answered to his son Nanar. Enlil now is trying to explain to his son and is treating him a little bit like a little spoiled brat. And he's like, yeah, I gave you kingship. It wasn't guaranteed for life, for eternity. This happened. Pack up, let's go. He didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to hear any of the whining. Tells him to take hold of his spouse Ningal, flee the city. Even I who decree fates, its destiny I cannot bend. Thus did Enlil, my brother, speak. A calamity none greater since the deluge gods and the earthlings had befallen. Alas, not a destiny it was. The great deluge was destined to happen. The great calamity of the death-dealing storm was not. By a council decision it was caused. By weapons of terror it was created. By a decision, not destiny, were the poison weapons unleashed. By deliberation was the lot cast. Against Marduk, my firstborn, did the two sons destruction direct. Vengeance was in their hearts. Ascendancy is not Marduk's to grasp, Enlil's firstborn shouted. With weapons I shall oppose him, Ninurta said. Of people he raised an army, Babili as earth's navel to declare. Nergal, Marduk's brother, so shouted. Marduk, that was Enki's firstborn, was outraged that his father, the firstborn also, was not the direct descendant of the kingship. And this had happened because one of the previous queens in the line of the Anunnaki had changed this. She made it that it was no longer the firstborn son, but the most legitimate, meaning if husband and wife were half brother and sister, they were supreme because they had the royal seed. And since Enki's mother was a concubine of the king Anu, that's why he technically wasn't the one that was going to inherit the throne, but he should have been, because for thousands of years that's how they did it on the planet. Then comes along this one queen that changed everything. So Marduk was just trying to get back what was rightfully his in his mind. So Marduk's little brother, his cousin, and his uncle, They were the ones that in a council decided to unleash these weapons. They were the ones that didn't know what the hell they were doing. And they were the ones that caused this clear cloud to come and it desolated everything it touched. And the more the wind blew it, the more it dried and killed the earth. And that's why we have this desert, the stripe of desert. Ninurta is here saying, oh, but he raised the Babylonian, that he made his army. That's what he did. He wanted his kingdom back. In his mind, and in many of others, he was the illegitimate heir. Just like you see on Earth, where there are like the Tudors and the Lancasters fighting over who was gonna have the legitimacy, they did the same. It's basically, humans are still warring the gods' wars to this day. Enki continues to say that day and night he opposed with his voice, peace he counseled, imploring everyone. And Enki was like, what do you guys care that everybody worships Marduk? They love him. Basically, we're understanding that there is a base of jealousy. The Babylonians loved their king Marduk, loved their god. And these other guys were all getting jealous. Ooh, and here Enki says, have all the instruments been checked? Did not the era of Marduk in the heavens arrive? That means that it was his time to rule. They just didn't want him to. Nanar to Enlil on earth's born was unrelenting too. Marduk, my temple in the north city, his own abode made. So he said, Ishkur, Enlil's youngest, punishment demanded. Utu, son of Nanar, and Marduk's son Nabu, with wrath directed, the place of the celestial chariot he tried to seize. Everybody's complaining, then Marduk tried to go and take the spaceport. Anunnaki history tells us that the desert is...
That is super interesting.
I cannot believe I've really never heard that whole story before.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was a book you could buy. I kind of want to read that book. I'll see if I can find it. If I can find it, I'll try to remember to put a link in the description if you guys also want to check this book out. But that's pretty interesting. Like if there's glass in the sands and there's the pyramids right there, right? Which were some sort of technology, like some sort of power plant that they were using.
Yeah.
And then there's evidence of some sort of massive heat, at the very least, hitting these sands to turn it to glass.
And then you look at the map and it looks just like that from a from the west devastation.
Yes.
And it kind of triples off at the end.
I'd be very curious to see the jet stream path. You know what I mean? Does the jet stream path have that? Do we have models of the jet stream path that go back to that time? I would be really curious to see if that also lines up because it's very compelling.
And it's a story that seems to repeat itself a little bit on Earth. See, it's highly relevant right now.
Yeah. Well, I got to dig into this a little further. All right, that's all we have for this video. If you like this kind of content, do us a favor and hit that like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you can catch us in the next one, and we'll see you later. In a bit, Matt. Whoa.